Hey guys, today we are going to be talking about the end of Reconstruction. By no means are the issues of Reconstruction that came from the Civil War and before fixed by the end of Reconstruction. It's just there is a compromise of 1877 right here that basically ends this time period. And we'll be talking about that today. So we know that Johnson was impeached. He was not removed from office, but he definitely did not have a lot of support, so he didn't run again. So in the election of 1868, you have two new people running for president. The Republican is Ulysses S. Grant, and the Democrat is Horatio Seymour is his name. Grant ends up winning. That's largely because he was a war hero. A lot of people associated him with the end of the Civil War and the victory in the Civil War over the South. Also, you can see in some of these southern states, the ones who were able to vote, that Grant won a lot of them. And that's because this is the first election that there were Black voters. And a lot of them associated Grant with the end of the war and the end of slavery. So Grant becomes our 18th president. Now, historians generally agree that Grant was like a really honest, nice guy, but had literally no idea what he was doing as president. He had never been in political office before. I mean, he was like a military guy. He had a long military history, but he had no political experience. And so, what he does to try to overcome this is he brings people into his cabinet that he thinks he knows what they're doing, or like he thinks that they can do the job. The problem, though, is that his cabinet members end up being super corrupt and they take advantage of the fact that Grant doesn't know what he's doing and they abuse their power in the cabinet. There's lots of scandals and these kind of, they build and build and build to the point where there are like members of Grant's cabinet that are resigning all the time. And Grant, while he wasn't in on any of these scandals, it doesn't really make him look great that he doesn't know the stuff is happening behind his back. You can see here all of these scandals kind of like piling up on top of him. Probably the most famous scandal was the Credit Mobilier scandal. You can read through this if you want. Basically, what the Credit Mobilier scandal was is it was a railroad scandal where you had the federal government pocketing illegal profits from a railroad company. And then the profits were going back to senators and even the vice president himself, who ended up resigning. Here's an image of this scandal where you can see Uncle Sam looks really, sad and disappointed, just like the American people. Grant right here is holding out his pockets, basically saying, I don't have any of the money. I don't know what's going on. His vice president right here does know what's happening. He looks guilty and sad that he got caught. And then all these other people are like cabinet members and other politicians who are all just kind of, acting like children or like toddlers. And they're all trying to take a piece of the Credit Mobilier cake. So again, doesn't look really great. However, the one thing that Grant does right in his first term is he uses the military to attack the KKK, which we'll be talking about in another objective. But it's basically a white supremacy terrorist group. Grant uses the military to really try to protect Black citizens in the South and protect their voting rights. Keep the KKK at bay, throw those people in jail, that kind of thing. And because of that, he's largely reelected in 1872 for a second term. You can see across the South, Black voters love him. And a lot of the free states as well, they have a pretty strong Republican background. And so they vote for Grant as well, despite all the scandals. His second term, though, still doesn't go great. There's an economic depression that happens in 1873. So if you take all these scandals that have been happening with this economic crisis, the people in the North and even some people in the South just kind of become less concerned with Reconstruction. Especially people in the North are like, we don't want to pay for reconstructing their states anymore. I need to put food on my table, and I got to provide for my family. I don't really care what's happening in the South. And so Reconstruction, while it was making some strides, especially with the military trying to stop racial violence, it kind of stops in Grant's second term because people just start to lose focus on Reconstruction. And the government is losing money and they can't really pay to have the military in the South fighting the KKK all the time. So let's look at the South though for a second. There are new social groups in the South that we got to talk about. Some of them are good, some of them are not good. One social group is called the carpetbaggers. These people are generally not good. This is a negative nickname for Northerners who moved to the South to take advantage of poor people. Basically, if you had some money in the North, you could go to the South, buy up some cheap land, basically pay people, especially former slaves, pay them nothing to work on your land, and live a pretty cushy lifestyle in the South. Some carpetbaggers from the North were honest people. They were like teachers or doctors with the Freedmen's Bureau, but most of them are just dishonest people who are trying to take advantage of the economic devastation in the South. They're called carpetbaggers because a carpetbagger or a carpet bag was an old type of suitcase. You can see here where, the idea was you would put all your stuff in the carpet bag or in your suitcase and you would move to the South. This is also a famous cartoon here. You have a carpetbagger. It says the man with the carpet bag, the bag in front of him filled with other people's faults he always sees. So he can always see, how we can take advantage of poor people. The one behind him filled with his own faults he never sees. So you can see like there's a bigger bag behind him filled with all of the terrible things about him. All right, another group of people in the South are called the Scalawags. So I know it sounds kind of like a pirate. I don't really know where the name comes from. But the Scalawags, again, it was like a negative name that Southerners gave other Southerners who supported Reconstruction and the Republican Party. So they would support people like Grant or the use of the military in the South, that kind of thing. Scalawags typically liked Reconstruction and the use of the military and things like that because they didn't really want the South to go back to agriculture. They wanted the South to industrialize. They were like, hey, look how rich the North is. Why don't we just build factories? The problem is that the South tried that and there just weren't enough railroads and rivers and things like that to make factories really profitable like they were in the North. Okay, but those are scalawags. And the last group, and these are the worst, these are the redeemers. If you redeem something, you gain it back. So these are going to be Southern Democrats who hated Reconstruction and they wanted to restore what life was like before the Civil War. Basically, they redeemed their power that they had before the war. So these are going to be like the rich plantation owners and the really, really racist people living in the South. A lot of them were probably members of the KKK or other racial groups. So you can see here's kind of an image that shows all these different groups together. You've got the scalawag and the carpetbagger hanging from a tree. And the redeemer is a donkey because the donkey is a symbol of the Democratic Party, which was the party of the South back then. So you've got the donkey with the KKK on it, kind of trotting away, symbolizing that the KKK or the Democratic Party has done this to those people. Here's another image over here. These two guys represent redeemers. There's a rich one, there's kind of a poor one right there. And then this guy here, he is a Irish immigrant. We'll talk more about this later on, but Irish immigrants were mostly shown as looking like apes or like monkeys. They faced a lot of discrimination themselves, but they were often pitted against Black people because Irish immigrants saw freed people as like job competition and stuff like that. And so oftentimes Irish immigrants did not want more rights for Black people because it would, in their minds, infringe upon their ability to get a job or other economic opportunities. But you can see here they're all working together to disenfranchise or to perpetuate violence and discrimination against Black people. Okay, so we have an election. It's 1876. Grant has served his 2 terms. He's not going to run again. And the Republicans decide to go with a guy named Rutherford B. Hayes. He was a Civil War veteran. The Democrats go with a guy named Samuel Tilden. He was from New York. I think Hayes was from Ohio, maybe. Anyway, when this election takes place, the electoral votes are unclear. It's basically split down the middle 50-50. So in times where the electoral vote is unclear, it's up to the House of Representatives. And here's where a compromise is made because most of the House of Representatives were Democrats. Rutherford B. Hayes is a Republican, though. So the Democrats are like, hey, listen, Hayes, here's a compromise. We'll let you become president if you do a few things. Number one, you got to remove all the troops from the South. They also said he needed to do things like put a Democrat in his cabinet and a few other things. But the big thing was remove the troops from the South, basically end military reconstruction. And Hayes says, okay, I'll do that if I can be the president. So in the Compromise of 1877, Hayes becomes president, and this basically marks the end of Reconstruction because the military is no longer going to be in the South. The South gets to rule itself again, and it's going to become a dark and dangerous place in the South, especially for Black people after the Compromise of 1877. A lot of people didn't agree with this compromise, so Hayes earns nicknames like Rutherford or Rutherford Hayes or his fraudulency, things like that, because he just wasn't seen as a legitimate president.